So my question for you is, do you ever feel like, there's so much to do, but so little time, right? Do you make to-do lists that seem like they just keep getting longer and longer, but you're not really ever making progress? You're not feeling like you're getting things done. Or do you feel like you're prioritizing all the time and prioritizing all the things on your plate, since it's really demanding, right? Do you struggle with this prioritization project? You're not alone, right? A lot of us deal with that, where we have to-do lists and we're trying to do so many things, and then we try to prioritize. It's this crazy world. And I have that challenge myself, right? I still have that challenge. And the key is how you deal with that challenge, right? Where everything's important to me and everything's a priority, but I've got to sit there and determine the priority, because in reality, there's only one thing that's the most important thing. And that's the true priority, right? There's one thing that if you get it done, you're going to move forward in the direction you want to go, or the direction you want your business to go. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's training. First, we're going to go deeper into understanding, what do I even mean by the one thing? And then I'm going to make you recommendations for what that one thing might be for government contractors like you on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and then each month. And so if that makes sense, if you want to take control of your days instead of having them control you, put "I'm in control" in the chat or the comments, and just let me know you're tracking on this and you're coming along for the journey on today's training. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to my daily LinkedIn Live federal sales training, where I teach tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market. And since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When we follow that process, A to Z, we're going to achieve the results we expect. And that's why I like doing these trainings. Last year, we did over 180 of these trainings. We had those watched over 500,000 times. And each day we're going to be live this year. I want you to join me live or watch the replays if you need to. Before we get started, though, help buyers remember who you are. Do me a favor, in the chat, put your company name if you haven't done so already. Put your core competency, 2 or 3 words that describe what your company does, so that it's easy for us to understand. I work with customers in our workshop all the time, where we're helping them refine their niche. And this is really important, because the better you can define it, the easier it is for you to make people like me and buyers and the others in the community remember your name, your company name, and what you guys do. The other thing, last thing about the chat, is make sure you engage in the chat. There's fantastic relationships to be had in the chat and in this community for those of you who are looking for teaming partners, or just peers, or people along the same journey as you in the government contracting world. So engage in the chat, find people where it makes sense to connect with them offline, and go develop a relationship completely separate from me and this community. That's why we provide this, is so that you can meet other people. Okay, I have a lot I want to try to talk about as it relates to the one thing, right? Today, about doing more with less. When I say winning more with less, what I really am talking about is with less activity, right? Stop trying to do everything and really focus on less things to get done. And when you do that, you'll find you're getting more things done. I like to say you can move faster by going slower, which is totally counterintuitive, right? But you can make faster progress in your company by going slower and more methodical. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this topic today. So first, I would just want to talk about, from a high level, what do I mean by one thing? And I wanted to just share an example story, right? If you think about your house on fire, it's not really on fire. It's hard to use the example, but it's really meaningful. Think about your house is on fire, right? And you got to run in, and you can only save 10 things, right? What would those 10 things be? Just take a minute and think to yourself, right? Think about if your house has a couple of different floors or something, what's on each floor that you would want to save? Let's assume that people are out of the house, right? So I got 2 kids. Yes, I would want to save them. Yes, I threw them out the window to make sure they're safe before I looked at the 10 things. But what 10 things in your house would you grab? Think about that for a second. Now think about it. If I say, before I let you in the house, I say, you know what? It's only 5 things. Of those 10 things you just chose, you can only actually go in and get 5 before your house burns down and everything else is lost, right? What are the 5 things that are in that list of 10 that you just did that are the top 5 things that you're like, okay, these are the ones I'm going to get? Think about that. Which ones have to go by the side in order for you to pick your top 5? Now think about this at an even more prioritized way. What's one thing out of those 5 things that you would put at the top of the list? If you can only go into that house and get one thing and bring it back, what would it be? Right? Like in my house, I have my work environment. I have 3 floors in this particular place, right? And in the basement, I've got all sorts of family letters. My parents are both gone, and so I have a lot of these actual written letters from way back when, from my dad, my mom, my siblings. So I have that kind of genealogical information down in the bottom floor. And in the middle floor, there's family photos. So I'm thinking to myself, what's my one thing? You can only get one thing. What would it be? When you're able to make that decision, to walk through that example of 10 things and then 5 things and then one thing, that is prioritization. Too many of us get stuck by saying, no, the family photos and the letters from the parents, those are equally important. I got it. They're equally important. But if you can only get one thing, what would it be? Right? You have to prioritize. You have to truly choose in order to prioritize, right? You don't have to prioritize. You can sit there and try to go in and get a bunch of things and the house burns around you. That would be a bad thing to happen, right? But if you can prioritize correctly, you'll be able to choose one thing. And that's what I want you to focus on, is thinking about one thing as you move forward. What's the one most important thing? So put in the chat one thing. Let me know you're following that scenario of choosing 10 items that you can get, going down to 5 things, and then truly prioritizing to what's the one most important thing in your house. And we're going to move that into business in a second here. But put one thing into the chat. Let me know you're tracking on what I'm saying there. Okay, so let's talk about why is the one thing important, right? I use this analogy sometimes in other trainings that I do, that if you chase 2 rabbits, you're not going to eat dinner tonight. And what it means is, if you're eating rabbit stew, right, which I don't because it's too hard to catch them. No, if you're eating rabbit stew and you go out to catch a rabbit to eat for dinner and you try to chase 2 rabbits, they're going to go in different directions. And you might chase one for a second, the other one's coming across your path, you go to chase that, and you're constantly changing and you're restarting your efforts basically every time you turn to a new rabbit. Right? As long as you're chasing the rabbit, you're on one path. But the minute you see that other one, you think he's closer and you go to turn to grab him, you're starting anew again, right? So you're constantly doing that. So this idea of chasing 2 rabbits, you're not going to eat dinner. And it's the same thing by chasing 2 priorities. You are at risk of not getting either one of them done either at all or done to satisfaction, right? Another reason that it's important for you to prioritize this like this and choose your one thing is that when you're able to do that, you'll always be doing what's most helpful for your company. In this case, we're talking about generally sales in the government contracting world, right? So when you can pick the one thing that you're going to do today or this week or this month, then you're going to sit there and be able to choose what's most helpful for your company. Another way of looking at that is when you are able to prioritize, able to choose the one thing, you're going to force yourself to truly decide what one path is going to lead to the success that you want for you or for your company, right? Instead of many paths. They're really, even though, we tend to think sometimes we can take many paths, the problem is you're supposed to choose one of those many paths. If you try to walk on many of those paths, you're never going to get to your destination. Think about it this way. If we were going from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, and we said, hey, this is where we're at. This is where we want to go. Pretty clear, right? In business, this is where we're at. This is where we want to go. And in order to get to San Francisco, I can take multiple paths. I can go across the top of the country, the middle of the country, the bottom of the country. I can take some of these rural roads, right? There's many paths to get to San Francisco. I need to choose one and go. If I try to go down multiple paths, choosing to go into multiple agencies as an example, if I try to go down multiple paths, I'll have to go down this path a little bit, come back, go down this path a little bit, come back, go down this path a little bit. And when I get back to that first path I was on, I'm starting again, basically, because I have to get to the beginning of the path to get on the path to go down the path. And I have to refresh some of that activity. You're constantly restarting, like I said, with the other example with the rabbit, right? And so you want to choose a path. When you prioritize in this example, you're choosing one path that'll get you to San Francisco. Even if there's some construction and other stuff, that's fine. But you're on one path and your progress will continuously move forward. You'll have a compound effect of getting to your destination, right? And so it's really important to force yourself to decide, because that's the only way that you'll get to success, is when you choose the one thing that will lead you to that success. And so let's think about a couple of examples of What are the one things? Before I move into the daily, weekly, and monthly specific examples, from a high level, I just want to talk about this. And I want to show you, so the 7-step process for federal revenue success that we have, right? We describe the 7-step process that in order to achieve sales, you need to write proposals. In order to write proposals, you must have opportunities in your pipeline. In order to find opportunities, you must build relationships with agency and teammates. And in order to do any of that, you must call somebody by outreaching. You need to know who you're calling by finding and targeting them. And then you need to do research, right? And so when we look at the 7-step process, as I go forward, I'm going to walk you through some examples of what's one thing you could do in research? What's one thing you could do in targeting? Sometimes when you have an opportunity and it goes through a life cycle like this or a process, then you would start only in one place. But when you're working on your company, you can look at one thing for each one of these categories and say, am I doing one thing for each one of these? In a minute, I'm going to talk about time-based one things, right? One thing you do it daily, one thing you can do weekly. But here is another way of looking at one thing. What's one thing I'm doing to research my customer or whatever? What's one thing I'm doing to learn about new people targeting? Hopefully that makes sense. If it does, and you appreciate the idea and the simplicity of the 7-step process, put 7-step process into the chat. Also, if you want the 7-step process as a handout, let me know. Just put into the chat 7-step process handout, please, and I'll get that to you. Okay, so here are some examples before I move into the daily, but some examples of what the one thing could be. It could be one agency, like I mentioned. You choose one agency instead of going after multiple agencies. It could be, you could think about what's the one thing related to your top relationships. You could think about one thing related to your top opportunities. I talk about having slam dunk opportunities in your pipeline, but knowing the prioritization of your pipeline, knowing what one opportunity, what one thing in your pipeline is the most important, what one proposal is the most important. I know you got a lot of them you might want to write or going to write. What's one that sits at that top? So think about it that way. And I want to go into now just giving you some examples that you can think about one activity or one thing you could do daily, one thing you can do weekly, and one thing you can do monthly. So for the daily, what I want to do is actually give you 3 examples. It's up to you to choose. So these are 3 different examples of one thing you could do a day that would move your company towards the success that you want. So the first one, in no particular order, but the first one is make 10 calls each day. So this relates to the 7-step process in the opportunity process step, right? So make 10 calls each day. These are new calls calls to new people you've never talked to before, and you're trying to do an intro call, meet somebody, meet and greet type thing, right? So make 10 calls every single day. That'll take you 15 minutes max. If you actually get somebody on the phone and you talk to them, that's awesome. And if I was doing 10 calls a day and I talked to somebody, I would just count that the 10 calls are done. We call that a point system, right? So I want to do 10 points a day, 10 calls. Every call is a point, right? So 10 points. But if I talk to somebody, talking to somebody is worth 10 points. It's a way to make sure I'm time blocking what I'm doing, because somebody I talk to might eat into that 15 minutes. That's totally cool. But I don't spend more than 10 minutes, let's say, 15 minutes making those 10 calls a day. So that one could be a one thing I do today that's, if I don't do anything else, I do that. Another example of a one thing is what you're doing right now is I attend Neil's training, right? You attend my training each day. This is relationship building, right? Obviously, I like you here that you're learning from me and you're hearing tips for me on success in the federal government space. But you have this whole community of peers throughout the government contracting world that you can build relationships with. So that 7-step process, that's that relationship step. So if you spent the 30 minutes a day, 12 to 12:30 every day here with me, that's a good one thing, because you're investing time in professional development and you're investing time in relationship development, either relationships with people you've already met and you're just in there saying, hey, we're networking, right? Or finding new people. Sometimes buyers come in here. So it's a good use of your time. That might be a good one thing for you to put on your calendar. And the last example of a daily one thing that you might put on your calendar is to move one opportunity, your top opportunity, one step forward. And this is related to the opportunity process step within the 7-step process. And so when I talk about moving an opportunity forward, you might think about it as me trying to reach out to a government buyer to learn about their challenges, or me reading a strategic plan or an annual report to learn about their challenge, Or maybe I already learned about their challenge and I can sit there and write 2 paragraphs that is just summarizing what that challenge is for that customer. Even though the RFP might be 3 or 6 months out, I can just summarize that challenge and I can pass that challenge over to my colleagues and say, hey, can you take a look at that? My one thing might be to take that paragraph I wrote a different day and take it right back to the same person who told me those challenges and say, hey, does this ring true with you? Right? And you don't have to show them the paragraphs. You can just talk to it off of what you wrote, but you're strengthening that top opportunity by doing one task. That task could take 30 minutes at most, right? To write 2 paragraphs on challenges you already assumed. And in Capture for opportunities, there's so many different tasks that you should be able to find one thing you can do each day to move your top opportunity forward. It's totally okay that if you have a top opportunity that is very under control and the next task is 3 days away, will you take your second top opportunity, right? So you work your way down. But the most important thing is you're working one thing on your top opportunity every single day. So if that makes sense, put daily into the chat. Let me know you're tracking on these 3 examples that you could do daily each day. Make 10 calls each day, attend my training every day, put that on your calendar, or move an opportunity forward, right? I'm telling you to do one thing each day that moves you forward. But also keep in mind, you can look at the 7-step process and go, what's one thing I'm doing to research forward? What's one thing I'm doing related to opportunities? What's one thing related to proposals, right? You can do one thing on those each day and you can block it into 15-minute increments, 30-minute increments to move it forward. All right, let's talk about weekly. Hourly, I need to drink water. So let's talk about weekly. No particular order again, but what's one thing you could do as it relates to relationships in the 7-step process? You can meet with a strategic partner. This is a teaming partner, right? Not necessarily a teaming agreement, but a teaming partner compared to a government strategic partner. But meet with a partner once a week. And so if you're meeting with a strategic partner every 2 weeks, then it shouldn't be hard for you to get to the stage where you're meeting with a strategic partner. And when I talk about this, this is not, hey, we went in, we liked each other, we got out, we talked about this or that. Or, hey, the football season ramped up. Here comes the playoffs. Who cares? That's not business. That's not sales. That's not your job. And that certainly is not sales, right? Meeting with a strategic partner is talking about the agency you guys are both trying to go after, or the opportunities you're looking at or thinking about, bringing up new opportunities to discuss. Is there a fit between our 2 companies on this one? But meeting with a strategic partner will allow you to build that relationship tighter with them, right? And I don't mean a whole bunch there's all sorts of contacts and leads and people you'll know out there. Strategic partners are ones that will help you move your company forward and help you move the opportunities forward, and one that you're committed to helping them move forward in any way that you can help, right? So that strategic partner, once a week, meet with them. And you can alternate this, right? So that you can make sure you're managing multiple strategic relationships, but at least once a week, the one thing you could do that could be so helpful might be meeting with that strategic partner. Another thing, strategic partner now on the agency side is have one meeting a week with your target agency. So I know somebody who's going after the Navy, they should have one meeting a week, not try to make a call or any of this stuff. What is one thing you can do to move that relationship forward? We'll have a meeting with the PEO Digital. I just watched the Navy CTO, who's also part of PEO Digital, put out something this morning on LinkedIn. Well, I would be reaching out saying, hey, can I get an intro call? Or diving deep into the program executive offices to meet with somebody. But this will help you in the 7-step process for research. You're still learning more and more and more about your customer and your agency that you're targeting. And it also help you build a relationship with those people you're meeting with, right? We know that we need to get in and talk with the program office people. It's a separate training on how do you get in the door, but it's up to you to schedule the next meeting, Hey, Jane, we just talked. Can we meet again in 3 weeks? I want to go away, do some of this stuff that we talked about. How about follow-up? We schedule a meeting. Well, now I've got my one thing down with one person in the Navy as an example. So do that. One thing a week that you could do is meet with an agency strategic partner. So the third thing is find one relevant RFI to, and I wrote to practice writing. So this can help for outreach, for opportunity, and for proposal. Those 3 steps in the 7-step process. What I want you to consider doing as a one thing each week that I will do to improve my company and to move forward towards success is identify one RFI that's relevant to what we do every single week. So if you're a company that does risk management framework, right? There might be 1 or 2 opportunities and RFIs that say risk management framework. but there might be 100 of them that say a lot of other things and RMF is in it. That's okay. You can respond to those RFIs and say, hey, I'm not talking about these things, I'm talking about this. And that helps you with outreach, because when you respond, you're getting your company's information inside the wire, into the program office, into the contracting office, et cetera. It helps you with opportunities as you identify whether this opportunity you're responding to, this RFI you're responding to, should go into your pipeline, who you might team with, et cetera. And then proposal, because you should never write an RFI that isn't in a proposal way of thinking, right? What's the point? You should be writing at that caliber. Writing for the win is what I call it. But the reason I like it in particular is if you do this every single week, you are doing one thing that relates to outreach, but you're also practicing. You're creating reusable material. If you're writing to risk management framework every single week, or at least you're identifying one new one that your team can do. And keep in mind, some of these things I mentioned, it requires your company to have at least, 10, 20 people or something. But some of them, like picking up the phone and making 10 calls a day, that's just a one-person company task. So a billion-dollar company could do that, and a one-person company could do that. So you've got to balance it out. So if it makes sense what I'm saying here about weekly tips, put weekly in the chat. And those 3 tips were: meet with a strategic partner. That could be your one thing. Meet with an agency strategic partner. So you're diving deeper into the agency, and find one relevant RFI source of thought that you can respond to and practice writing. So that brings me to the monthly. So the first 2, I was giving you 3 tips, but there's only one thing that I would recommend you put on your plate that is your one thing for a monthly activity that you should get done every single month. And that is writing one proposal going out the door. It doesn't matter whether it's a subcontractor or prime, right? I say that for a basic number, everybody should be writing at least 4 proposals going out the door every month, 1 prime and 3 subs. This training is less about that and more about getting 1 proposal out the door every single month. If you do that, and it is a proposal that's related to your slam dunk core competency, then that will lead you to success. That's one thing you could do every single month that would move forward, right? It's unrealistic to do that every week, for example. That's why it's a good metric to put on you for every single month. So writing a proposal, remember, it can be a prime contract one where your company is leading the charge on doing the writing, or it's a subcontracting where somebody else is doing it and the RFP is due in the month. And if you're going to say that that's your one thing, then what you need to start doing is lining up RFPs that are due in February, one that's going to be due in March, one that's going to be due in April, right? This idea of how can you have a one thing determined, but if you haven't determined where that opportunity or that RFP will be, right? So you need to find the RFPs, but it's a good way to figure it out. So every month, write 1 proposal. That's one thing you should be doing. And it doesn't matter if you're a 1-person company or 50-person company. And I'll tell you why in a second. Put monthly in the chat if you understand you should write 1 proposal a month, monthly in the chat. And the reason I say if you're a 1-person company is because if you're a 1-person company, you should have some sort of expertise. And in particular, I'm talking to people who are mostly in the construction and services side of the house, not product side, because product's bidding, not proposals necessarily. But even if you're 1 person, right? When I started my company way back when I was we were a SharePoint company, right? As an individual, I was a SharePoint expert. So I could go in and get on somebody's team and be a SharePoint expert. So you can do that, right? I know we've got people in today's community who are like AI, right? You should be able to knock on enough doors. If you're making 10 calls a day, you'll find the people where you can get on their team and you're taking 2% or 5% of an opportunity or 1 FTE or whatever. But you should be able to build the relationships that even enables you to get in. It's unrealistic if you're under, let's say, 5 people to spend time prime contracting, right? So don't waste your time doing that. But it's realistic for you to be able to get into a subcontract if you've started a company with a core competency, right? That you have an expertise. If you don't have an expertise, it's going to be a little harder. Okay, that was our training for today. We talked about knowing your one thing. I really hope you go learn your one thing for daily, weekly, and monthly activities.